You lost the argument, at least that's how it feels. You went in with something real, something that hurt, something that mattered, something that deserved a straight answer, and somehow, 40 minutes later, you're sitting there apologizing. You're not even sure what for. You just know that whatever you came in with is gone, buried somewhere under an avalanche of words that sounded almost like sentences, almost like logic, almost like a point, but somehow added up to absolutely nothing. And yet here you are, feeling like you lost. Could you tell me something? What exactly did they say? Not the feeling of it, the actual words. Try to reconstruct the argument, try to find the thread of their logic, the point they were making, the position they were defending. Take your time. Nothing. There's nothing there. Just the vague memory of words, lots of them, delivered with complete confidence in a tone that made you feel like you were the one not keeping up. That wasn't a debate, that wasn't even a conversation. That was a performance specifically designed to make sure you walked away with nothing. Confused, exhausted, somehow guilty, and completely unable to explain why. Word salad, that's what it's called. And it has nothing to do with your intelligence, your memory, or your ability to follow an argument. It has everything to do with someone who discovered, probably quite early on, that if they talk long enough, contradict themselves confidently enough, and change the subject smoothly enough, you'll eventually give up and hand them the win. Which you did. Every single time. Let me put it this way, word salad isn't someone getting flustered. It isn't someone who just struggles to get their point across under pressure. That would almost be understandable. What this is, and I need you to really hear this, is a choice. A deliberate, practiced, refined choice that they've been making every single time you tried to have a real conversation with them. I tell you what actually happens. You come to them with something real, something that hurt, something that mattered. And instead of just answering you, they talk. And talk. And talk. Not to say anything, but to bury what you said under enough words that by the time they stop you can't even find it anymore. Let's have a look. First comes the deflection. Your point disappears inside a pile of loosely connected complaints, random observations, and just enough truth scattered through it to make you think you're getting somewhere. But listen, you're not. You're walking in circles and they're holding the map. Impressive, really, to say absolutely nothing for that long without even pausing for breath. Then they contradict themselves. Confidently. Sometimes in the same sentence. And when you point that out, when you say, wait, you just said the complete opposite of that, suddenly you're the problem, you're being difficult, you're not listening properly, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Right. Because the issue here is definitely your listening skills. How interesting. Then comes the history. Suddenly this conversation isn't about what you raised anymore. It's about something from 4 months ago. And the thing before that. And something you said once that they've been quietly filing away ever since. Your original point is completely gone. You're now defending yourself against a charge sheet you didn't know existed, while they watch you scramble and call it a discussion. And then, right when you're lost, exhausted, and can't remember what you even came in with, they wrap it up. Calmly, like something was resolved. But let's sit with the obvious, nothing was resolved, nothing was even addressed. But you're too tired to say so. So what do? You let it go. And letting it go looks exactly like losing. Which was the whole point from the very beginning. Funny how that keeps working out for them. Can I ask you something? How many arguments have you lost that you should have won? Not because your point was wrong, your point was completely right. But because by the end of the conversation you couldn't find it anymore. It was in there somewhere, buried under 40 minutes of circular logic, random detours, and confident nonsense delivered with the energy of someone who absolutely knows what they're talking about. Which they didn't. But points for commitment. Let's talk about what this has actually done to you. Starting with your head, because word salad doesn't just win arguments, it rewires the way you think. After enough rounds of it, you stop trusting your own ability to follow a conversation. You start wondering whether you're the problem, whether you're not smart enough, not articulate enough, not quick enough to keep up. You, the person who came in with a completely valid, completely coherent point, started questioning your own intelligence, because someone talked in circles long enough to make confusion feel like your fault. That's quite an achievement on their part. Really, take a bow. Then there's what it did to your voice, because at some point you stopped raising things. Not because they weren't worth raising, but because you already knew how it was going to go. The deflection, the contradictions, the sudden detour into something you said 3 months ago, the exhaustion, the giving up. You learned that bringing something real to that conversation was just signing up for a guaranteed loss with extra steps. So you went quiet, you filed things away, you swallowed things that deserved to be said out loud. And they carried on completely unbothered, because silence, for them, is just another win. And your relationships outside of this one. Think about how many times you've tried to explain an argument to a friend and watched their face while you did it. That specific look, the one where they're trying to follow what you're describing but the logic keeps collapsing. And you find yourself saying, I know, it sounds crazy but... Well, it does sound crazy, because it was crazy. You were just too deep inside it to see it clearly. And here's the part that should make you genuinely angry, you started apologizing. Not because you were wrong, but because the conversation was so exhausting, so relentless, so completely devoid of any actual resolution that sorry became the fastest exit available. So you used it. Over and over again. You handed them an apology that belonged to them just to get out of a conversation that should never have been that complicated in the first place. You weren't confused. You were being deliberately buried, and they did it so consistently, so smoothly, that you started calling it communication. Enough, I know what's going through your head right now. I know because you've been thinking it this whole time, and I'm going to save you the trouble of saying it out loud. You're telling yourself they just get passionate. That when things get heated they lose the thread a bit, say things they don't mean, go off on tangents because they care so much. Right, so every single time, every single conversation where you tried to raise something real, they just happened to get so passionate that your point got completely buried and they walked away clean. Every time. Not once did the passion work in your favor. Not once did it make them more honest, more accountable, more willing to actually hear you. Funny how passion only ever seems to work in one direction with them. And then there's the one that really gets me. The idea that maybe you just weren't explaining yourself clearly enough. You. The person who manages to communicate just fine with literally everyone else in your life. Your friends understand you, your family understands you. But somehow, specifically in conversations with them, you just couldn't quite get your point across. Every time, for the entire relationship. Come on, you know that's not true. You've always known that's not true, you just needed somewhere to put the blame that wasn't them. And look, yes, sometimes they said things that made sense. Just enough truth scattered through the nonsense to make you think the whole thing added up to something. It didn't. You were just so desperate for the conversation to mean something that you grabbed onto the one part that felt real, and built the rest around it. That's not them making valid points, that's you working overtime to find something worth holding on to. And the fact that you can never quite remember how the argument actually went afterwards, that's not your memory failing you. That's what happens when there was never any real logic to follow in the first place. You can't retrace a path that was never going anywhere. And they knew that. They knew you'd walk away foggy and uncertain and unable to put your finger on exactly what happened. That fog wasn't a side effect, that was the goal. You weren't bad at communicating. You were talking to someone who had zero interest in being communicated with. And there's not a single thing you could have said differently that would have changed that. Right, shall we acknowledge the obvious? You know what happened in those conversations, you went in with something real and you came out apologizing for it. And you've spent a long time telling yourself it was because you didn't explain yourself well enough, didn't stay calm enough, didn't find the right moment. None of that was the problem. The problem was that you were having a conversation with someone who had already decided how it was going to end before you opened your mouth. And here's the cold part. It worked. You walked away confused, guilty, somehow responsible for a mess you didn't make. And they walked away clean. No accountability, no consequences, nothing to answer for. Just you standing there trying to piece together what just happened while they'd already moved on. So what now? Now you know what it was. You know it wasn't your communication skills. You know it wasn't your inability to stay calm or make your point clearly. You know the conversation was never going to go anywhere, because going somewhere was never the plan. The plan was to make sure you never got to finish a single sentence that might actually cost them something. It's the high time of you stop. You stop bringing real things to someone who has proven, time and time again, that they have absolutely no intention of engaging with them honestly. You stop sitting across from someone who uses words like a weapon and calling it a conversation. You stop walking into a room where the game is rigged and wondering why you keep losing. Because you were never losing, you were being played. And the only move left is to stop showing up to the table. The talk is over. The rest is yours.